By the end of this lecture, you are going to learn how to create a brand new user account with an email and password using Firebase Authentication. The first step is to enable the email password sign-in method inside Firebase Authentication. Open up the browser and go to console.firebase.google.com and log in with your Gmail account. As you can see, I am already logged in, so it took me straight to the Firebase dashboard where I can see all the Firebase projects I created earlier. Now I am going to choose my first Firebase project. Once I'm inside the project, choose Authentication from the sidebar. If you don't see it here, select Build and choose Authentication. Once you are in the authentication page, click on the Sign-in Method tab. In there, you can see all of the sign-in providers that the Firebase Authentication offers. To enable the email password sign-in method, click on the email password button, then toggle the enable switch and click save. Within a few seconds, you can see the email password sign-in provider has been added with the status enabled. At this stage, I have successfully enabled the email password sign-in method. The second step is to import the Firebase Authentication module in order to create a new user account. Now I'm going to import the Firebase Authentication module via CDN, Content Delivery Network, which is basically Firebase Authentication JavaScript file hosted on the Firebase domain. To find the URL of the authentication module, go to the browser and type https://firebase.google.com/web/learn-more-available-libraries. Hit enter, then click on the available Firebase JS SDKs from the CDN link. As you can see, it shows all of the available import statements that we can use. The one I am interested in is authentication. At the time of this recording, it shows the version 10.0.0, and you may see a higher version of it depending on when you watch this lecture. I'm going to select the library reference next to the authentication, then copy everything from import to the ending codes, like so. Come back to the app.js file and paste it at the top, like so. This module has a lot of methods related to authentication, but we need only 2 methods in order to create a new user account. So the first one is getAuth and the second one is create user with email and password method. The getAuth method will create an instance of an authentication object which we need to do any kind of authentication related operations, such as create a new user account, logging into a user account, logging out an user account, and so on. The second method is create user with email and password. This is the one I'm going to use to actually create a new user account in the Firebase Authentication page. Let's destructure these methods from the import statement. So inside the curly braces, after the keyword import, type getAuth, a uppercase, comma, create user with email and password, like so. The third step is to actually call the create user with email and password method when a user clicks the create account button. The create user with email and password is one of the Firebase authentication methods that will allow you to create a new user account on the Firebase Authentication backend directly from the front-end web app. This method will take 3 arguments. The first one is going to be authentication object. The second one is going to be user email. The third one is the user password. So inside the sign up button pressed function, right below the prevent default method, invoke the create user with email and password method, opening closing parenthesis and semicolon. The first argument we need is going to be authentication object. So let's create it using the get auth method that I have imported here. So right below the import statement, type const space auth equals get auth, a uppercase, opening closing parenthesis and semicolon. The get auth method will return an instance of the authentication object, then add the auth object as a first argument inside the parenthesis in here, comma. The second argument is going to be the user provided email. As you can see, I already have a DOM reference for the email input field called email. To get the value from the email input field, all I have to use is the value property on the email input element object. So dot value, comma, let's do the same for the password. Password, which is the password input field that I have declared here, dot value. Now I have provided all the arguments the method needs. The create user with email and password is an asynchronous function that will actually return a promise. So the promise can be either fulfilled or resolved, meaning if everything goes well, it will create a brand new user account, or the promise can be rejected, meaning there is an error creating a user account. To handle the promise, I can either use then catch block or async await syntax. I'm going to use async await syntax in this case because it is more clean and the recommended way of handling a promise these days. In order to handle a promise using async and await, type the await keyword in front of the create user with email and password function like so. As soon as I add the await keyword will convert this asynchronous function to synchronous, meaning that any code after this await line won't be executed until the promise of this function is either resolved or rejected. At this stage, the sign up button pressed function contains an asynchronous function. So in order for the await keyword to work properly, the sign up button function has to be converted into an asynchronous function as well. To do that, all I have to do is to add the async keyword in front of the sign up button pressed function right below the parameter e. Now you know the create user email and password method returns a promise which is either resolved or rejected. But how do we know what the promise actually returns? To figure it out, I'm going to wrap this method with the try catch block. So try opening closing curly braces, catch opening closing parenthesis. I'm going to pass error in there, then opening closing curly braces. Now I'm going to move this function inside the try block. So select, cut and paste it here. The create user with email and password method will return a user credential object that has information about the user account. So I'm going to assign it to a constant called user credential. Now I'm going to console log the user credential object like so. Inside the catch block, I'm going to console log the error as well in case the promise is rejected for some reason. So console log opening closing parenthesis and semicolon inside their error dot code. The fourth and the final step is to run the app and create a new user account. I'm going to right click the index.html file from the project navigator and open up with live server option, which is one of the Visual Studio Code extensions. This will automatically open up the browser and start running the app on the local server with the port 5500 in my case. You may have a different port number, that's okay. Then I'm going to open up the developer console. I'm going to type an email and password, then hit create account, and I can see the user credential object in the developer console. When I expand the user credential object, there is a user object. In there, I can see the email that I used to create a user account. Nice. Switch back to the Firebase Authentication page. Under the Users tab, I can also see the brand new user account has been created with the same email address. At this stage, I have successfully created a brand new user account using email and password in Firebase Authentication. By the end of this lecture, I am going to show you how to check the user authentication state using the onAuthStateChanged method. The first step is to understand what the onAuthStateChanged method does. The onAuthStateChanged method gets triggered when a user authentication state changes, such as creating a new user account, logging in, or logging out. For example, when the app loads for the first time, the onAuthStateChanged method will return null because at that time no user account is created or logged in. In that case, I can show the sign up form and hide the user profile view. As soon as a new user account is created, the onAuthStateChanged method will return the newly logged in user's data, so that we can keep the user profile view visible and hide the sign up form even after the page reload. The second step is to implement the onAuthStateChanged method. For that, first import the method at the top in the app.js file, like so. Then call the onAuthStateChanged method, like that. This method takes two arguments. The first one is the auth object that I have already created at the top. So inside the parentheses, type auth, comma. The second argument is the callback anonymous function with the parameter user, which is a JavaScript object. So opening closing parenthesis, user in between, equals angle bracket, and opening closing curly braces. This callback function will be triggered anytime the user authentication state changes. If the user is logged in, the callback function will be triggered and we can capture the logged in user data from the parameter user. In there, I'm going to console log the user object. Let's go ahead and reload the page, and you can see the onAuthStateChanged method returns null. That's because there is no user currently logged in. Let's go ahead and create a new user account. As soon as a new user account is created, I can see two console log messages of the currently logged in user. The first one console logged from the onAuthStateChanged method because it will be triggered when a user authentication state changes from null to the new user account. The second console log message comes from the create user with email and password method right after successful creation of the user account. Now I'm going to check if the user is logged in or not inside the onAuthStateChanged method. So if opening closing parenthesis and opening closing curly braces, inside the parenthesis type user, else opening closing curly braces. Let's move these three lines of code that hides the sign up form and show the user profile with the logged in user email from the create user with email and password method to the onAuthStateChanged method inside the if block. If the user object exists, show the user profile and hide the sign up form and set the user email to the user profile page. The user object returned in the create user with email and password method is a bit different than the user object inside the onAuthStateChanged method. I can directly access the email from the user object, so I'm going to simply get rid of the user credential. The reason I moved the code from the create user with email and password method to the onAuthStateChanged method is because the create user with email and password method will be called only once at the time of creating a new user account. That means the app only shows the user profile view and hides the sign up form right after creating a new user account. But it does not check the user authentication state after that to keep the user profile view visible and sign up form hidden, especially when you reload the page. On the other hand, the onAuthStateChanged method will be called anytime an authentication state changes, including creating a new user account. It also checks the user authentication state when the page reloads, so this is the great place to hide the sign up form and show the user profile view, so that it keeps showing the user profile view, hides the sign up form as long as the user is currently logged in and the user session is not expired. Let's test it out. When I reload the page, the app brings back the user profile view, which is exactly what we wanted. As you can see, when I reload the browser, first the sign up form becomes visible for a few seconds, then it flips back to the user profile. That's because the onAuthStateChanged method takes a few seconds to listen for any change of the currently logged in user authentication state. To handle the delay, I'm going to hide the sign up form by default, similar to the user profile. So in the style.css file, inside the sign up form CSS rule, type display none. Reload the page. I see a blank screen, then the user profile becomes visible. Nice. Let's show the sign up form and hide the user profile when the user is not logged in, which is the else statement inside the onAuthStateChanged method. So sign up form view dot style dot display equals block in quotes user profile view style dot display equals none in quotes, like that. The fourth step is to add the loading icon as soon as the app loads on the browser to avoid users seeing a blank screen for a better user experience. The good news is that I can easily do that using a semantic UI CSS class called loading. In the index.html, add UI segment classes to the section tag at the top. Also add the loading class. The loading class will add a nice loading icon to our app as soon as the page loads. Nice. Now let's hide the loading icon when an appropriate view becomes visible. First, let's add an ID attribute with the value main-view. Then go to the app.js file and create a DOM reference for the main view element. So const space main view equals document dot get element by ID, opening closing parenthesis and semicolon. Inside the parenthesis, type main-view in quotes. At this stage, all I have to do is to remove the loading class from the main view. Inside the onAuthStateChanged method, right after the if statement, type main view.classList.remove opening closing parenthesis and semicolon. In there, type the class loading in quotes. Let's test it out. Reload the page. The loading icon becomes visible and it hides when the user profile view becomes visible. Let's try the other way around. For that, I'm going to delete the user account from the authentication page and come back, reload the page. At this stage, loading icon appears when the page loads and the sign up form becomes visible and loading icon gets hidden because the user is deleted and is no longer logged in. Perfect. Currently, when a user logs out, the app shows the sign up form, but it makes sense to show the login form so that the user can get into the app again. So the first step is to create and design the login form. With the help of Semantic UI CSS framework, it will be easy and quick to create a professional looking login form. To do that, first I'm going to hide the sign up form so that you can see the login form as I'm creating it. In the app.js file, inside the onAuthStateChanged method, in the else statement, I'm going to comment code signup form view.style.display equals block line, which hides the sign up form on the browser. Now, in the index.html file, right after the user profile HTML markup, I'm going to write a comment saying login form just to be organized. Below that, create a div element with the class names UI segment, which are the Semantic UI CSS classes. The UI segment classes create a nice outline for the login form. In there, create a form element with the class names UI form, like that. After that, create a div with the class names UI stacked segment. These classes create a stacked style inner border like this. In there, I'm going to create an HTML markup for email. As you can see from the final design, the email input field has an icon on the left and the placeholder text beside that. To do that, first create a div element with the class name field, which is the wrapper for the email field. In there, define a div element with the class names UI left icon input. At this stage, all I have to do is to add the two HTML elements. One is for icon and other one is for input. I element with the class name mail icon. Below that, input, type, email, placeholder equals email, like so. Let's take a look at it, and the email field looks great. Now let's do the same for the password. So create a div element with the class name field. In there, create a div element with four classes UI left icon input. In there, create I element with the class names lock icon, then the input field input, type password, then the placeholder equals password. Next, I'm going to add the login button. Right below the password HTML markup, type button element with the class names UI button blue fluid. in between the button tags, type login. Finally, let's show the link that takes to the sign up form in case the user does not have an account yet. So after the ending form tag, create a div element with the class names UI, message, small. Inside the div tags, type need an account ? And sign up text in between the anchor tags, like so. At this stage, I have successfully created and designed the login form for our authentication app. The second step is to actually show the login form instead of the sign up form when the app launches for the first time or when the user logs out. For that, first I'm going to add an ID attribute to the login form. So inside the index.html file, ID equals login hyphen form in quotes. Then go ahead and create a DOM reference for the login form in the app.js file. So const login form equals document.get element by ID, parenthesis and semicolon. Inside the parenthesis, type login hyphen form in quotes. Now all I have to do is to show the login form when no user is authenticated and hide the login form when the user logs in. So inside the onAuthStateChanged else statement, delete the code that I have commented and type login form dot style dot display equals block in quotes semicolon. Then I want to hide the login form when the user logs in. As you can see, currently I hide the sign up form inside the if statement. Let's change that. Replace the sign up form view to login form. At the moment, the login form does nothing. Let's add the login functionality in the next lecture. I will see you there. By the end of this lecture, you are going to learn how to implement a login functionality for an existing user account. The first step is to get the user typed email and password from the login form when a login button is pressed. To do that, add ID attributes to the login form email and password input fields as well as the login button. In the index.html file, inside the login form HTML markup, add an ID attribute to the email input field with the value login-email. Let's do the same for the password input field. So ID equals login-password in quotes. Finally, add an ID attribute to the login button with the value login-btn. Next, create a DOM reference for the login email, login password, as well as the login button inside the app.js file. Right below the login form, type const space login email equals document.get element by ID. Inside the parenthesis, type login-email in quotes. Then const space login password equals document.get element by ID, opening closing parenthesis and semicolon. Inside the parenthesis, login-password in quotes. Next, for the login button, const space login btn equals document.get element by ID. Inside the parenthesis, type login-btn in quotes. Next, let's attach a click event to the login button. To do that, call the add event listener method to the login button element object. Scroll down right below the other add event listener methods, type login btn, then call add event listener method on it, like so. The add event listener takes two arguments. The first one is going to be the event name, so click in quotes, comma. The second argument is going to be the callback function. I'm going to call it login button pressed, like that. Finally, declare the login button pressed callback function here, right below the logout button pressed function. Const space login button pressed equals opening closing parenthesis equals angle bracket curly braces. Inside the curly braces, I'm going to console log the user typed email from the login form. So console log, inside the parentheses type login email that I am referring from here. To get the value from the login email input field, I'm going to use the value property on it. So dot value. Let's see if the email is console logged. So in the browser, type an email and hit login. I can see the text what I have typed in the developer console, but it disappeared quickly. After that, the page gets reloaded. That's because of the form tag in the login form HTML markup. When the login button is clicked, which is declared inside the form element, by default, form will attempt to submit the data to the server, which will trigger a page load. We don't want that to happen, as we are sending data to the Firebase backend via AJAX request. To prevent the default submission, I'm going to pass the parameter called e, refers event object, inside the parenthesis in the login button pressed function. Then inside the curly braces at the top, call the prevent default method on the event object. So e.prevent default, opening closing parenthesis and semicolon. This will prevent the default submission. I'm going to get the password as well. So console log login password.value. Let's test it out. Type the email and password, and I can see both console logged in the developer console without the page reload. Perfect. The second step is to implement the actual login functionality when a login button is pressed. To do that, first I'm going to destructure the sign in with email and password method from the Firebase Authentication import statement at the top. Right after the sign out method, type sign in with email and password. Then go to the login button pressed function and call the sign in with email and password method inside it. This sign in with email and password method takes three arguments. The first one is the authentication object that I have declared at the top in here. So inside the parenthesis type auth, comma. The second and the third arguments are the actual email and password values. So login email dot value, comma, login password dot value, like so. The sign in with email and password, that is also an asynchronous method, so type the await keyword in front of it. Also type the async keyword in front of the parameter header. Now I'm going to wrap this method with the try catch block to catch any potential error. So try, opening closing curly braces, catch, pair of parentheses, and pass the error object there, opening closing curly braces, and console log the error. Then move the sign in with email and password method inside the try block. That's it. Let's test it out. I'm going to create a new user account in the Firebase backend for now. So go to the Firebase Authentication dashboard. Under the Users tab, click the add user button and type an email and password and click add user. Then come back to the app and enter the same email and password, hit login. At this stage, I am successfully logged in to the app. That's great. The third step is to handle if there are any errors when the login button is pressed. As you can see, when I press the login button and leave the email and password fields empty, I get the error message in the developer console, and you can see the line number here, which is coming from the sign in with email and password catch block. Let's get the error code from the error object using the code property. So error.code. Let's try it again, and I can see the error code says auth/invalid-email in the developer console. This error looks much better. As you can see, I already have a helper function called format error message that handles sign up error messages here. Now I'm going to reuse this function to accommodate login errors as well. So the goal is to have this format error message helper function to handle both the sign up and login errors at the same time. For that, first I'm going to add a second parameter to the format error message helper function called action. So comma action. Then I'm going to go to the sign up button pressed function inside the catch block where I call the format error message function, add a second argument. So comma sign up in quotes. Also call the format error message function inside the login button pressed catch block. So format error message opening closing parenthesis. The first argument is going to be the error code. So error.code. But the second argument is going to be login in quotes. What will happen is that when there is an error creating a new user account, the format error message will be called from the catch block inside the sign up button pressed function, and the action parameter will hold sign up. If there is an error when the user tries to log in, the format error message will be called from the login button pressed function catch block. This time the action parameter will hold the text login. Using the action parameter, we can determine what form the user is currently interacting with, either the sign up form or login form, and based on that we can show the appropriate error. I'm going to wrap the if block with the other if statement inside the format error message function. So after the message, type if action equals sign up in quotes. I'm going to move the existing code there because I know that is created for just handling sign up errors, like so. Now let's handle the login errors. So else if opening closing parenthesis action triple equals login inside the quotes opening closing curly braces. In there I can create a custom message depending on the error code. So if error code equals auth/invalid-email, I want to set the error message to be email or password is incorrect. So message equals email or password is incorrect in quotes, like that. I also want to show the same error message when the password field is empty. So add two pipe signs inside the parentheses and type error code equals auth/missing-password in quotes. I'm going to handle one more error, which is user not found. For example, when a user types an email and password but both are invalid, it gives that error. To handle that, type else if error code equals auth/user-not-found opening closing curly braces inside there, message equals our system was unable to verify your email or password in quotes. As you know, the format error message will return an appropriate error message. So I need to console log the format error message call to show the error messages in the developer console. So inside the login button pressed function catch block, type console log and call the format error message function inside. Let's try it out. As you can see, the custom error message appears in the developer console as expected. Finally, let's show the error message on the login form. So go to the index.html file, create a div element inside the login form, similar to what I have done for the sign up form. So div element with the class names UI error message. Then add ID attribute to it, login-error-message in quotes. After that, create a DOM reference for it inside the app.js file. So const space login error message equals document.get element by ID with a pair of parentheses and semicolon. Inside the parentheses, type login-error-message in quotes. At this stage, all I have to do is to set the error message to this element and make it visible. So go inside the login button pressed function catch block, type login error message dot inner HTML equals format error message error.code comma login in quotes. Then login error message dot class list dot add, then add a visible class to it. That's it. Let's test it out. And the error message is working exactly the way we wanted. Perfect.